Welcome to Postwave.
Welcome to Postwave.
You're here with Eric and Trevor, and today we're talking about The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Yep, this is a book that I either 1/3 or 1/2 read a couple years ago.
Hey, so, good job.
Good, yeah. It's good to have a excuse to dive back into it.
Mm-hmm. This is one of my all-time favorite books, both as like a philosophical exploration and just kind of as entertainment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's got it all. like a lot of Dostoevsky.
Yeah. So I guess today we're specifically looking at a few sections that relate to one of the themes, one or two of the themes tied together, which is in one part is exploring executions and what's it like to know that you're going to die.
So just before we start, let me make sure I'm clear on like whose perspective each of these excerpts is from.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's kind of a weird out of context thing.
Yeah. So the first like chapter 5 section.
Yeah, so it starts so it starts with the Prince Lev Nikolaevich Mushkin, the protagonist of the book, is speaking with the Yupanshin ladies, who are the mother is a distant relative of him, and his 3 daughters, and he's just met them, and he's kind of going off talking about all sorts of random stuff, and they're all loving it. Mm-hmm. And so he starts talking about the experience of someone he used to know back in Switzerland, which was someone who had been set to be executed, but then was pardoned at the last minute.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the second excerpt?
The second excerpt, he sort of jumps slightly to another instance where he witnessed an execution in France.
Mm-hmm.
And he's describing what that was like and imagining what that person must have been going through. And so then later, the second excerpt, which was what chapter?
I think you said 21.
21. Yeah, if you count directly from the beginning.
Yeah.
So that is describing the prince as he's kind of walking around in a delirium and thinking about random things. And it's kind of the first insight into maybe he's not perfectly mental health. He's not in perfect mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And in this section, he starts to describe what it was like when one of his epileptic fits was about to come on.
Mm-hmm. And then the chapter 33,
mm-hmm.
Is that also from his perspective?
No. Okay. So yeah, out of context. So this is actually a different character, Yapolid, who is a younger man of about 18, who's a student and who is also consumptive and has been told he has 6 weeks to live.
Okay, wow. Yeah, I didn't realize he was that young.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. So Eric, could you maybe give us some insight into what you think ties these 3 different excerpts together?
Yeah, well, that's kind of the thrust of the whole episode, that I chose these particular scenes to juxtapose. So let's go through them one at a time. And we'll start with the first scene, where the prince is meeting with the Yupanshin ladies and starts relating a story from someone he met back in Switzerland of someone who was set to be executed and then pardoned at the very last moment.
Right. Like literally on the scaffold, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's yeah, exactly. It's like by firing squad, and they've got the blindfold in, and they've got the official reading of like, you're going to die now. And so the story is that there's this one guy, and he's with a group of his fellows, and they're all set to be executed. And so they have 5 minutes left, and they're all lined up, and there's the firing squad. And he starts describing how he felt like there was so much time left in the world. He had 5 whole minutes, 5 minutes to do everything he needs to do. So he's portions off the time that he has left. He's really proud about how he does this. He sets 2 minutes aside to say goodbye to his fellows. 2 minutes to reflect on his life and reminisce, and 1 minute to make peace with his encroaching death.
Yeah, to kind of like look inward.
Yeah. So much time.
Yeah. Yeah. This reminded me a lot of something I think we talked about in our time episode about the logarithmic nature of time. And I think it's similar to the idea of how when you're a kid and you have less time, when you kind of have less time under your belt that you've lived, everything seems to just take a long time. Like the summer seems like it lasts forever. And, class can seem like it's going on forever.
Especially leading up to summer break.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suspect that a similar thing is true at the end of your life, that with that other reference point, time also seems to kind of stretch out because you have something else to kind of compare it to, or like another signpost.
Oh wow, yeah, like a landmark.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. You're floating around somewhere in the middle, and you don't really have a sense of where you are until you get close.
Yeah. I mean, it could also be that I think like the more active your brain is, the longer it seems, the slower time seems to go. Like, I think that's part of why people say when they get in like car accidents, everything seems to move in slow motion, because their brain is just kind of going nuts in the moment.
Yeah, there's so much more information.
Yeah.
You're just experiencing more, and so more is happening within that time frame.
Yeah, and I think it's like a lot of it is just retroactive. Your memory of it seems like it took forever, but of course, the same amount of time passed no matter what.
Well, that's kind of interesting, though, because it would kind of imply, if you have the experience of a lot of experience seeming to be longer in a short amount of time, then that would kind of highlight the fact that time is not a set in stone, equally divided thing. It's not the clock, and that whatever chunk of time from one point to another, there's infinite instances between one and the other.
Right. So this philosopher J.M.E. McTaggart that I've been super into recently, who has this paper on the unreality of time, it's something he talks about as the specious present, which is this idea that what feels like exactly now is completely subjective and of varying length, and because it's so subjective and varying that it can't possibly exist as a well-defined thing.
Yeah, it's like looking at a number line, and you can, whatever section of the number line you take, there's infinite numbers along that line.
Right. You can always just add a 5 to the end of whatever decimal you're at.
Yeah, that's disorienting.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really know. I mean, there might be some like tiniest unit of time as far as the universe is concerned. I think there's been some studies about that. Like I remember seeing. I mean, it's always something that was like theoretically proposed, but I mean, yeah, physicists are kind of looking for like a smallest unit of time.
Yeah, I'm really dubious about that. I think that is kind of missing the concept of what it is to exist over time.
Why is that?
Because if you did find a smallest unit of time, that would only apply within a certain context, a certain trajectory through space-time. But as we've talked about before, you could conceive of different trajectories through space-time where it's a different dimension is being used as time, is being progressed across, and that is what creates the impression of time. And that different trajectory would maybe not have the same laws of physics, and so the constants would be different. Wouldn't be constrained by the same boundaries that hold in our experience of space-time.
Huh. Interesting. There's a lot to unpack there. So by other dimensions, you mean like other spatial dimensions?
Yeah, well, yeah. And that's just kind of how I think about it, is that time and space are interchangeable. I mean, isn't that kind of the concept of having the single word space-time?
I think that's part of it. I know that like inside a black hole, space and time can kind of switch roles somehow. I mean, even if it's as far as just how we conceptually think about it, there is something to that.
I sort of visualize it as like a fabric, and you have let's just condense it down to two dimensions. You have your x and your y axis, your threads going vertical and your threads going horizontal, and they're interwoven, and you could follow one thread along, and that experience of that thread is going to be like, oh, here's crossing a thread, and here's crossing a thread, here's crossing a thread. Or you could take one of the threads that's going perpendicular to that, and you're going to have a different experience of crossing different threads.
Yeah, there are lots of different ways to kind of accomplish the same or similar thing. All right, well, we managed to get to the nature of space-time within 5 minutes of talking about this book from the 19th century.
Yeah, so we're doing some
near record
literary exploration. This was a book episode.
Really, every episode is just an excuse to talk about the fundamental nature of reality. And
well, it's different if you think about how artificial if
panpsychism is
true. Yeah. Well, I think that's about it for the episode. I think we've covered all the bases. So, the guy's set to be executed. He's got his last 5 minutes cordoned off, and he feels like he has an extraordinary amount of time, and he describes it as each instant being so full of meaning and beauty that he wants to live this way all of the time he has left, and if by some miracle he were to be pardoned, he would live like this every day of his life forever.
Right. And then, of course, he gets pardoned and can't do it.
Yeah, it's like after a few months, he gets in a bar fight and dies or something.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, yeah, there are lots of situations where we feel like we either can do something, or there's only one way we could possibly live, and then our brains can't do it. Like we just, we defy our own expectations that we set out for ourselves.
Yeah, and maybe there's a physical limitation as well. Like there's this transcendent ideal that we work toward of like ecstatic experience, but realistically our physical bodies can't take that over time. You can have an instant of it, but forever over the course of time, it's always gonna break apart again.
Yeah. Life kind of averages out
Mm-hmm.
in the end. There's not really getting any way of getting around it.
Mm-hmm. And so he says that in this state of mind, he has an extreme attention to detail. He's noticing all these minute particulars. He says he sees a reflection off a monastery roof, and that this reflection seems to hold some sort of deep and meaningful insight that he takes note of and remembers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting. He says, I think right after that the thought of death is awful, but the thought that he might not die and have to go on living after having experienced this kind of experiencing this intensity of all the details of life, he feels like going on living after that would just be unbearable.
Yeah. And so this is really interesting to me, because all of these details that we just mentioned, the extreme attention to detail, the dilation of time, the meaningful insights, the unbearableness of continuing, and also he goes on and says that he remembers like asking one of his fellows like some everyday question and just being like really interested in the response, like, hey, how are you doing? I'm okay. And it's like really feeling the meaning in that. And all of those things together is exactly what I felt like on the first time that I did acid.
There's another check mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah, and people will talk a lot about how you can get to the same brain states that psychedelics conjure up in other ways. And I think a lot of those ways have to be somewhat extreme. Besides, they either have to be extreme or fleeting, or kind of with a like a long, protracted effort, like in meditation or something like that. They're very difficult to actually achieve. But something like actually being presented with your own death, that immediately I feel like could very easily be something that conjures up one of those brain states.
Definitely. That makes me think as well of the experience of performing on stage when you have anxiety.
Yeah. I thought about that a lot too. Like going into audition, it's like, okay, I have 5 minutes. Now I have 4 minutes. What am I going to do in these next 4 minutes?
Yeah.
Like it seems like it just lasts forever. Or like there's like so much you could do, or like, I don't know. But at the same time, it's like you can't really do anything. But you kind of end up like dividing the time and up in the same way.
Yeah, and also because you're going up against this thing that is just terrifying to you. It's like the pinnacle of like scariness, and to face that, like that's an edge you're pushing against. I think in the same way that if you do a psychedelic substance, there's an edge, or if you're facing an execution, there's another edge.
Yeah, it's kind of like a limit of human experience. Because I mean, what your brain is thinking when you're in a performance situation is, oh, there's like a lion or something that I'm gonna have to
wrestle the lion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe it's like the fording of new experience, where you don't have the scaffolding of your normal unmoored day-to-day life that's so far away from any landmark. When you don't have that mundanity to go back to, you light up, your mind lights up, and you start experiencing, because there's new things to experience.
Right. And you realize that the only reason things seem mundane is that they just happen so often. But actually, if everything just happened once, everything would be like a miracle.
And also incomprehensible, right?
Yeah, literally, like, even asking someone like, how are you doing? It's like,
what just happened?
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also kind of gets to probably less true in Dostoevsky's time, but our lives now are just so cushy by especially by the standards of human history. But I mean, for us in like a developed Western country, by the standards of just the world today, and it's easy to just lose the miraculousness of everything because your senses get kind of dulled.
Yeah, you're not forced to see your own mortality on a daily basis.
Yeah, or even come close to any of those like peak states isn't exactly the right word, but kind of like pushing up against the limits of what the human brain can do.
Yeah, you don't even have to feel discomfort most of the time. You don't have to feel hungry or thirsty. Yeah. So I don't know if you knew, but Dostoevsky was actually held under a mock execution when he was 27.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
And that is absolutely the inspiration of this whole section. And why he can describe it with such vivid detail is because he actually went through this.
Wow, that's wild. What were the circumstances of his mock execution, do you know?
Yeah, so as I understand it, he was arrested with being in connection with a secret society that was not in support of the government at the time, which was under Tsar Nicholas I. And so he was arrested and held in prison for 8 months before he was told that he was going to be executed. All of them were going to be executed. And they went through the ceremony of breaking the swords and denouncing their rank and putting them up on the scaffold and getting the gun squad out and having them blindfolded and then having someone run in last minute with a white flag and say, "You've been pardoned, all praise the Tsar, he's so glorious and merciful."
Wow. Yeah, that's intense.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the whole thing was planned from the beginning as a mock execution to instill fear and intimidate as an intimidation tactic.
Yeah. I get it's still not quite as bad as like right up into the point of them like firing and it's just like a blank round or something.
Yeah, that would be extreme.
Yeah.
But still, obviously, this was extreme enough because it had such a profound impact on Dostoevsky.
Yeah. Was he a Christian throughout his entire life?
I don't know for sure, but it seems that may have been the case.
Yeah. I just wonder if that affected his faith at all.
Yeah, wow, I wonder. It's interesting, though, to see, like, because he's pretty vivid and in detail about some of the ways this did affect him in his writing in The Idiot here.
Mm-hmm. What would you say those are beyond just the very realistic portrayal of what it's like to go through an execution like that?
Well, I think just the vividness and the appreciation of life. And also, as we go on to the next section, it starts to get into the morality of capital punishment. And it's clear that Dostoevsky is very opposed to capital punishment of any sort.
Yeah, that makes enough sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. What reasons does he give?
So let's jump into the next section and we'll explore how he portrays this. So this next section, the prince is, again, still talking to the Yuvanchan ladies and now starts to describe an execution that he saw in France of a young man of 27 years old who had reportedly done some violent crime.
And this one is by beheading, right?
Yes, by beheading.
Yeah, and it's in front of a pretty big crowd, right? He says like 10,000, 20,000.
Yeah.
10,000 faces, 20,000 eyes.
Wow. Yeah, that definitely changes the dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
So at the start, so he, there's definitely a lot of parallels to this experience and the one he just described. It's almost like a continuation, but he just sort of changed the scene a little bit. And it starts with the same imagining that he has all the time in the world. He talks about the streets. He's being brought down the streets and there's the crowds around him. And he's thinking, I don't even have to think about my execution yet. We're still on this street, and there's the street after that, and then after that there's the one with the Baker Street. I've got all this time.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely had those thoughts like driving to auditions before. It's going to take literally forever to get there.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll never get there.
Yeah, well, if you're driving to the audition, and in order to get to the audition, you have to get halfway to the audition first. How can you ever get there?
So it's a valid question.
Yeah, so then there's all the crowds, right? The people watching, and he just has the experience of just thinking that out of all of these people, only I, and specifically I, am to be killed.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that would be like?
Oh my God. I don't know. My brain would just go to how like unlucky I am.
Right to the self-pity.
Yeah. But then, you know, if you can truly recognize in that moment that yourself is an illusion, and that you're actually one with the whole crowd, that you know.
Wow. Okay.
I think that would be the ideal way to go, but I doubt that I could actually make myself embody that for anything more than like a split second.
Yeah. Although it's interesting when people approach that barrier of death, that who you are, I think who you are has to change, and some of the things that have been true about you forever are going to change. And so maybe you would not be able to embrace that, but maybe actually facing your mortality in that very real way, maybe you would be able to embrace that.
Yeah, and again, that's kind of a similar thing to what happens on psychedelics. Like the barrier to that kind of thinking breaks down a little bit. I mean, I don't think you could get there if that kind of thinking hadn't already been placed in your head somehow. But yeah, it might be a little bit easier under those extreme circumstances.
Easier to accept when it's your only option.
Yeah, but at the same time, though, like that's a situation in which it seems really, really obvious that you are going to die and none of these other people are going to die.
Yeah, it's kind of a feeling of injustice.
Yeah, and like how could we possibly be the same part of this collective consciousness or whatever if it seems very clear that the lights are going to go out for me and not for all these other people, and that they're going to keep on living.
Yeah, so the prince sort of imagines as well that same feeling of just this isn't fair. Why just me? And also a sense of humiliation on that point.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be, I think, embarrassed.
I mean, he did commit some horrible crime, right?
I mean, supposedly, yeah.
So I mean, you should be ashamed. That's kind of the point.
Shame on you. Shame. You should be ashamed of yourself. We should get you a ruler and a nun habit.
Yeah, so he also talks about how like the division of time gets down to the very split second before the blade falls. Like how he would just be there listening for the sound, and he'd only be able to hear the sound for a split second before he actually was killed.
Yeah, and
that thought is just like
but that he would surely hear it no matter what. No, despite the noise of the crowd, despite how quiet it was, he would hear it.
Right. Yeah, I was because I have kind of a morbid fascination with execution a little bit, I guess. Even though I definitely oppose the death penalty, but but specifically with beheading, like how long the head remains conscious for. It's just looking that up a little bit. It's like, I mean, the answer is not very long, I think, but at least I think you at least be able to have the thought, oh shit, I just got beheaded.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
That's so curious, though, because your nervous system, as we've talked about before, extends beyond your head. There's the part going down the spinal column, and there's all the parts in your gut. And so I wonder, it would be like in a split second, who you are is now only a portion of who you were just a moment ago.
Yeah. I mean, you would instantly lose all bodily sensation besides just the pain of everything you're being severed.
But also your cognitive, because really a part of your brain is also being just cut off.
Right. Yeah, it's something that you've never lived without.
So your experience would be maybe an experience of what it's like to be similar to you but not you, just that part of you.
Yeah, although I doubt whether you could discern what might be a pretty subtle difference there in the few seconds with everything else that's going on, but it would definitely contribute.
I don't know if you have a cutting off like that. Maybe we can tie it back again to psychedelics. If you have an experience where it's a part of you is cut off, does the part of you know that that's the case, or does it just continue to have experience and now says this is who I am without any awareness of that there had been another part?
How does that connect to the psychedelics thing?
I guess in an oblique way, just that I've had the experience of being cut off from my past self, from my memory, and being so forced into the moment that I feel like everything I know apart from that moment doesn't exist.
Yeah, I guess probably the only time I've had that on psychedelics was my first time, and I did not know what was happening at all. But I know how kind of terrifying an experience that can be, I think. Yeah. Just not being able to remember anything about yourself or what's going on.
I remember from my first experience just being terrified that I didn't know how to play the guitar anymore. Which, I'd been playing for, at that point, close to 10 years, and it was such a huge part of where I was, and I was like, I don't think I know how to do that anymore. And the thought was just so gut-wrenching and terrifying. Although, of course, wow. I went and got my guitar and reassured myself that I could play it. Yeah, so in that sense, I feel like there's a parallel in just that sensation of being cut off from yourself, or at least from your identity that you've learned to call yourself, and all that you're experiencing is just a portion of that self as it exists in the present moment.
Yeah, and a similar narrowing of your experience to the details that are right there in front of you, and how special they are.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've often felt that in the time of your dying, there has to be like you're saying a logarithmic experience of time, where maybe that last split second, as it approaches nothingness, just continues to be dragged out and dragged out. Like the closer you get, the more experience you have. So that it's kind of like an infinity of time leading up until that point of death.
Yeah, it could be something like that. Although, I mean, I'm sure it depends how you die. Like if I don't know, like if you're in a really bad car wreck and it's just kind of a high enough impact speed that like there's like no brain left to experience anything, then I feel like it would be a pretty quick thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're totally right that, and this is just like my own intuition, but I think you're totally right that different kinds of death have different experiences of what that dying is like. But I think there might be like a constant there. Like, even though like a higher speed car crash where things are obliterated faster, even though that from an objective outward perspective is faster, maybe from the internal perspective there's like a constant of experience which is infinite.
Yeah, but how does your brain know to begin the infinity of experience besides just the being overwhelmed by trying to take in everything that's happening?
I don't know.
In the instant before.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying, as long as you know your brain is actually there to be experiencing things. I mean, I think we know. I mean, people have near-death experiences and that kind of thing, and we're almost definitely sure that involves DMT somehow being released in the brain, right? Mm-hmm. Which definitely has kind of time dilation properties associated with it. I forget. Do you plan on doing DMT at any point?
I don't know. I thought about it. There was a time in my life where I wanted to do it, but I think got scared away by some horror stories. There's a girl I worked with who said she had done DMT, and from that point on for about a month, anytime she heard a tone, she would dissociate and like stop being there for like 30 seconds or more.
A tone? Like any music?
Like a note, like a beep, or maybe things similar to sine waves.
Huh. That's interesting. Also scary.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe I'll wait till I die to see what DMT is like.
Yeah. But that's the thing, though. I mean, depending on how you go, you might not even get to experience it at all.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. It does terrify the shit out of me. But yeah. I think I'll probably end up doing it someday. But yeah, it's so obviously messing with something that's deeply intertwined already with the brain and dreams and death and all that stuff. It's just, it's really spooky.
Yeah, man.
Very spoopy.
Spoop-a-doop. So as the hardened criminal is being led up to the scaffolding, he breaks down and starts crying, even though he's never cried a day in his life. This hardened criminal who killed all these people. And he's following a cleric who is holding out a cross in front of him and saying scriptures and holding the cross for the guy to kiss. And he says that the guy is greedily kissing the cross over and over again with genuine desire.
So is the implication that he had kind of some very rapid religious conversion experience right there?
I don't know. Or
if maybe he was already Christian.
The sense that I got more was just that it's like a comforting thing. You know, if it's there and if you're lost and you're facing this horrifying fate, just to have the story, if it's true or not, doesn't matter. Just the story that God is looking out for you and God will have mercy, and all you have to do is just be grateful.
Yeah. It's a very, very comforting mindset, no matter what you think about, how real it is.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's essential in a place like that.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest takeaway for, well, at least the biggest point that Dostoevsky seems to make from this parable here is the certainty. He speaks repeatedly about the certainty of knowing that you are about to die, and that certainty is just so horrible and so unbearable that it's far beyond any suffering that the person's crime could have ever caused.
Right. Because the people he killed didn't know that was going to happen until very late, but he had to live with it, for days and hours and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. And those last few pregnant minutes.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that concept, that the certainty of knowing you're going to die is worse than if you have the freedom to think, however delusively, that you might yet survive?
What do you mean by having the freedom to think?
Well, so he talks about like how, for example, if you're a soldier in war, and even if you're standing right in front of a cannon, you still think maybe you can duck out of the way, maybe you can survive.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to be executed, that you know that you're going to die.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's really hard to actually figure out how I would feel put in that situation. But I mean, again, I would hope that I could reach some kind of place of acceptance, and probably wouldn't be able to get that far, but wouldn't be able to get this far, but just a kind of curiosity about what the hell is about to happen. But I mean, yeah, it's such a terrifying concept. I just feel like I would feel like a trapped animal or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, curiosity. Yeah. If you're, because what would be the point of hanging on to resentment at that point? What would it do?
Right. It's just gonna cloud the last moments you have left with that emotion.
Mm-hmm. And it's like at that last point, you owe no one anything. Everything you do now is for yourself.
Huh. Yeah, that's a interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
So why
seems pretty
why hang on to resentment towards other people if that doesn't serve you?
Mm-hmm.
Which sounds like something I could take into my own life at any given point.
Yeah, same here. We hope that you're enjoying every last minute of this episode so far. If you'd like to support us somehow, you can go like our page on Facebook, or follow us on Instagram, or give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, or follow us wherever you're listening to us. You can also send us an email at postwavepodcast@gmail.com, or check out our website at postwavepodcast.com. Thanks for listening.
So, jumping ahead to the next section, this is later in the book where the prince is kind of wandering around on his own, and we just get a little peek into his mind. He seems in a very distracted state, maybe not entirely grounded, and he starts to think about what it's like when he has his epileptic fits.
Do you know if Dostoevsky had any like personal experience with those?
I believe he did. I believe Dostoevsky did have epileptic fits.
Yeah, because the account he gives of it is pretty vivid.
Mm-hmm. And this is a theme that shows up in some of his other novels as well.
Yeah, and he kind of it kind of ties into the same vividness of experience that he was talking about prior to the execution, of just in that very instant before it. He's talking about the moments right before the seizure comes on, and he says, "These moments, short as they are, when I feel such extreme consciousness of myself and consequently more of life than at other times, are due only to the disease, to the sudden rupture of normal conditions. Therefore, they are not really a higher kind of life, but a lower." Okay, and then before that, he says, he remembered that during his epileptic fits, or rather immediately preceding them, he had always experienced a moment or two when his whole heart and mind and body seemed to wake up to vigor and light, when he became filled with joy and hope, and all his anxieties seemed to be swept away forever. These moments were but presentiments, as it were, of the one final second. It was never more than the second in which the fit came upon him. That second, of course, was inexpressible.
Wow. Yeah. So it's that same ecstasy. It's the same coming up against the wall, and so then having that vividness of experience.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think they're slightly different, because the epileptic seizure thing is like a maybe they create similar brain states, but the right before the seizure, I think it's just your brain is kind of automatically like lighting itself up, right? It's not from like, well, it depends what kind of epilepsy you have, I guess, but it's it could be without an external stimulus.
Yeah, it's kind of a nebulous point, because yeah, you're right. On one hand, it is an internal thing. It's just sort of alighting that way. The way the system is prone to do that on its own. On the other hand, there's indications in the book that there is a definite, if indirect, correlation between external events and his seizures. And in fact, in the beginning of the book, he goes to, or he's coming back from Switzerland, where he had just spent 4 years recovering and under medical care. And it seemed that just the landscape of being out in the countryside with the fresh air and space and calmness was what led him to become healthy, and that the clusterfuck of St. Petersburg life and screwed up people insinuating themselves into his life is what causes him to devolve into this agitated state, which brings on the seizures.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and he mentions there's like certain actions or mental states that precede it, like searching for something that he can't quite remember, right?
Yeah.
This kind of reminds me about something I heard about the similarity between like sleep deprivation and seizures and these different mental states, including being on psychedelics, and how they all kind of on some level mix the algorithms that are in your brain, so that you can get to kind of new realizations and mental states that you wouldn't have had before.
It's kind of like jumbling it up and to see what happens.
Yeah, and like different parts of your brain talking to each other that they wouldn't normally talk to each other.
There's a term in that from business school. There's like if you have a product from one market and you take it into a foreign market, that's like a particular kind of quote unquote innovation, because it can be highly effective in the new environment.
Yeah, it's like if you have a species that suddenly gets transplanted somewhere where it doesn't have any natural predators or anything, it just completely blows up. Population and everything.
Yeah. So yeah, he's talking about this ecstasy of leading up to this one instant of pure bliss, and as you were saying, describing is this sense of wonder and awe and of purest meaning, right? He talks about just having such a profound satisfaction of life in that experience that he can't help but know in his heart that it's true, even though he's a little conflicted, because as you just said, he talks about how he knows it's only the disease, right? And he ends up in a worse state off afterward, more like an idiot, more he can't talk, he can't think, he can't remember. But at the same time, he goes on, and even after that point, he says, but in that moment, there's such a strong sense that it was a true revelation, a meaningful experience, that he, even now knowing that, still thinks that must be true.
Yeah. Again, I can definitely connect that to psychedelics, because a lot of times you'll have revelations that seem profound and like you figured everything out, and then you get to the end of it and you feel like you weren't able to pull that out from the trip, and it seems like it was just kind of some brain state that was being induced without any actual underlying significance.
I've heard that a lot, that some people say a lot about their experiences, and I don't know, I don't characterize my own experiences like that. I feel like either I have been able to pull out that kernel of truth, or I feel like in every instance I've always been able to pull out some kernel of truth that's completely revolutionary and meaningful and worth the experience, despite any damages that experience might cause.
Yeah, I can't say I've really had any experiences where I came out the other side and was like, oh, that didn't seem like actual revelation. I'm just open to the idea in theory that you can have revelations that are like pseudo revelations or whatever.
But yeah, then it's like, who's to say, right? If you in the moment, if that the version of you that is experiencing that says it's true, and then the version of you after that experience, who's a different version of you, doesn't see it anymore because they're not in the same experience. And so looking externally back at your previous experience, you see that and you say, I don't see the kernel of truth there, so maybe it wasn't there. But who are you to say?
Yeah, I think
after all.
Yeah, I think you're really the person is the only one who can really decide, whether the thing is true or not. But yeah, especially in the case of a seizure like that, where it's just this kind of like sudden shock of signals kind of disorganized firing, whatever. Or I think in seizures sometimes it's like really, really organized, like all at once.
That seems to be what Dostoevsky is describing here, is this symphony of everything in order.
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe the feeling of meaning is tied somehow to like very ordered firing of neurons. I don't know. It'd be interesting.
Maybe you derive the meaning from the structure that is inherent in that ordering. I mean,
the feeling of meaningfulness is some pattern of firing of neurons in the brain, because that's all any feeling is. But I just wonder if it's like inherently more ordered somehow.
Well, that makes me think of counterpoint music, where you like for our lay listeners out there, that includes composers like Bach, where you have very particular rules about how the lines interact, and there's a very clear structure there, and that structure is what gives the music meaning, the rules that each of those lines follows in order to interact with each other.
Yeah, and it's that there's like, for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different parts, and they all have their own internal logic, and if you listen to them one at a time, they would seem beautiful on their own because they follow certain guidelines about contour and rhythm and all that stuff. And then when you put them together, they have this other level of order that's vertical. So there's like multiple levels of order happening.
And then they're all kind of the same rules, though, right? Even if you look at it vertically, or if you look at it like a melodic, like you couldn't have parallel fifths, even if it's being outlined in the melody, or if it's one line and the line above it.
Right. Yeah, they are. I think there are slightly different rules because there's nothing really about. There's nothing about harmony really in individual line. What makes a good melody?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So you're right. They're definitely unique, but maybe they're related. They have some cross section there.
So at the end of this section, he says, after these seizures, I feel then as if I understood those amazing words. There shall be no more time. What do you think he means?
I think he means that he's experiencing in the moment an eternity. He's experiencing the present moment as it exists outside of time, therefore in eternity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's also just getting a sense of how subjective it is and how it can expand and contract.
Yeah. That's curious though, because it makes me think, if you have this ecstasy of extreme order, everything lining up, and you perceive it as being a meaningful experience, then if that meaningful experience is a moment in space-time that's there and will always be there, isn't that worth it no matter what comes after?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, unless what comes after it is just, 100% pain for 50 years or something. Then probably no, it's not worth it. But
Well, that's curious though, because Dostoevsky would seem to imply the opposite, or at least the idiot seems to think that if he has that transcendent experience, it's worth it, even if after that, because it describes what he's like after the fit, and it's not a happy sight. It's really kind of depressive, not engaging with the world and not finding any meaning with the world, just kind of living as a zombie, and yes, leading to very painful situations because he's unable to interact with the world around him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I was exaggerating, but yeah, in his case, it seems like it would be worth it if it's just, like momentary stupefaction.
Well, not momentary, like permanent, lasting damage from that.
Oh, really? Does he say it gets like worse each time? Yeah.
Yeah. A little spoiler there, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll probably mention it more in the next section too. But I was kind of reading up on Terence McKenna's last few months, and he had this brain tumor that apparently right before they discovered it, he had this seizure that he described as the most intense psychedelic experience of his life, or one of them, which is saying something for him.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, so yeah, there's definitely some precedent for these being intensely significant and meaningful experiences, not just kind of disordered, like overwhelming stimulus or whatever.
Yeah. I remember hearing Terence McKenna talking about his experience after he knew he had the brain tumor, when he was speaking with his neurosurgeon, and the neurosurgeon was saying that, he back up, and he asked the neurosurgeon, so my thoughts are represented by my brain, right? So if the brain tumor is in there, then would that be representing thoughts that I have in my mind? And the neurosurgeon said, yeah, I suppose so. And Terence was just wondering, like, what thoughts in my mind are that tumor?
Yeah, and I forget, but it was like in his like frontal cortex or something, like some, right? Well, let me look it up, because
I don't know.
Let me get that wrong. Yeah, there's this good Wired article that maybe I can you can put in the show notes. His doctor also described that the tumor as a fruiting body that was sending mycelia through the surrounding tissue. I mean, it wasn't literally fungus, but that's the way his doctor described it. It's like a similar thing.
So not literally sending mycelia, just like a parallel to that
pattern. But yeah, it was in his right frontal cortex, which is the I think, from what I understand, kind of one of the conscious, like higher thinking parts of your brain. Yeah.
Jesus. Makes you wonder though, like if you could change your thought patterns, maybe you could eradicate the
I don't think that's how that works.
I mean, why not? Like if hypothetically you could isolate which thoughts were it.
Well, I think that, I mean, that's not possible for other reasons. It's not possible for other reasons beside this, but I think that does kind of get to the free will, changing your own brain type thing.
I mean, if you can make decisions, then why not be able to make decisions about things that go on inside your own mind? Like that's kind of like the quintessential place where you can make changes, if you can make changes anywhere.
Yeah, I don't think the changes you're going to make are, well, we don't really know how the brain works. I was going to say that the changes you would make wouldn't change your cell's DNA, but I think actually, I mean, this is part of what I find really fascinating about the brain is I think they found that neurons can change their own DNA somehow. So yeah.
I've heard that as well.
So I mean, but the quote unquote thought you might have to think to get the cancer to go away might be so like complex and technical, and it might require such sustained concentration on it that it would basically be impossible.
I don't know. Well, who's to say impossible, right? Like, how do you know? But yeah, okay. Maybe it's impossible, but maybe it's not, right?
I'm gonna have to go with not possible on that one.
It's just because you feel like it.
Seems
well, okay. I'm gonna go the other way just because I can.
I mean, because that's the only way you can go.
No, I changed my mind. You're right. No, actually, I changed my mind. You're wrong.
Any more thoughts on this section?
Let's go on to the next one. So here we have, we're departing from the prince's point of view and moving on to Eupoli, the young student who is consumptive and has been told he has 6 weeks to live. And this kid is kind of an interesting character. He's bitter a lot of the time and resentful, and maybe with good reason. I mean, that's a very bleak situation that he's in, although not nearly as bleak as many in the society that Dostoevsky depicts here. But all the same, he's just in this really sorry state and in this social setting where there's no compassion. I think that's one of the most jarring and blatant things about this section, and this is maybe a couple chapters after the section of this that I sent to you, but it becomes just so painfully clear that it's just such a bleak social landscape that of course he's gonna harbor resentments. So anyway, so he's terminally ill and he's kind of bitter, and he just sits and stares at the wall outside his window and doesn't have any motivation to do anything, to get up or study books. And he talks about like how he starts reading a book and then realizing that he's never going to get to the end of it, and so he throws it down to the ground.
Yeah, damn. And he's dying of consumption, right? Yeah.
He is, yeah. And so this section is, he had written the day before he came to the prince's house, he'd written out just this kind of sprawling what's the word? He'd written out this sprawling stream of consciousness. He calls it a confession, but it's just this rambling letter where he talks about just his experience. And he comes to the prince's house the next day with the intention of reading it aloud in front of people. And again, we have the same theme as with the executions, the sensation. He knows he's going to die, and only he is going to die. He talks about how, like, even he sees a fly in a sunbeam and says, even that fly knows his place in the symphony of life. But I don't have a place in life because I know that I'm going to leave life.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that doesn't totally follow for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's holes to that, but at the same time, I think it's worth exploring. What do you see with it? Why doesn't that hold water?
Well, I mean,
you?
if we're using the symphony analogy, it just means that you have a rest coming up, and you played your whole part. Now you have to rest.
Oh yeah, I like that way of looking at it. Rest 36 bars to the end.
Tacit.
Alas.
Yeah, he's a percussionist playing Mozart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it kind of assumes that everyone knows they have more of a part than he does, when in reality no one really knows, or most people don't know what part they're playing, really.
Yeah.
They're just kind of doing, taking things one day at a time, and just kind of taking things as they come.
Yeah, there's that illusion of constancy, right? But then, like, anyone could die at any moment.
Mm-hmm. So I guess what sets this section apart from the other two is that he knows he's going to die, but the period of time is much longer, right? It's months instead of hours or minutes.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But it still has the certainty, right? The certainty that it will happen.
Yeah. Have you given much thought to what you would do if you found out you had some terminal disease and you had like months to live?
I haven't given it a lot of thought because honestly, I don't know what I would do or what that would be like, and so I can't really prepare for it.
Yeah.
What about you?
I mean, I would at least want to travel and go see one thing that I hadn't seen yet. I wouldn't want to go crazy like trying to visit a bunch of different things, but yeah, I would at least want to go see something like incredible that I hadn't seen before. And spend a lot of time with family and write music. Yes. Although this is the other place I wanted to bring up, Terrence McKenna, because he kind of said, yeah, I just want to like sit in my house with my wife and smoke weed and just contemplate existence. It's like that. Yeah, that works too.
Yeah, so
who's very much not trying to travel and see a bunch of the world.
Yes, just having new experience.
Yeah, trying to like cram stuff in.
Yeah. Having the new experience of trying to cram stuff in.
It depends who's doing the cramming, though.
Yeah, so Eupolide talks about how he describes this good deed he did where he helps this guy who was in a really Kafkaesque situation, and then he thinks about how he doesn't have the time to do that ever again, like the amount of time that took. If he were to embark on that, he wouldn't be able to carry it out anymore. And so he just has this sense of like, what's the point of trying to do anything like that if you don't have the time to finish it?
Yeah, doesn't he also kind of talk about how much a good action will actually reverberate?
Yeah.
Which my impression was that he was kind of hopeful, but maybe I was like misreading things.
No, I think you're right. He seemed really like proud of the thing he did, and that it would have lasting impact. And I think that was why he's so bitter about like not having the time to be able to do that ever again.
Yeah, because he sees how big the impact can potentially be from something like that.
Mm-hmm. Makes me think though, like could he not try to do a smaller good deed in the time that he has left, if that's what he wants to do?
I guess so, but I mean, it's also, I mean, the good deed he stumbled into was almost purely by chance.
Yeah, that's true.
So like, I mean, he could, besides, like things like volunteering at a soup kitchen, which I don't even know if that like existed. I don't
Cough blood into the soup.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it seems like he kind of lucked into this particular good doing opportunity. But the same idea comes up as before of states of sickness being altered states similar to dreams or drug induced states, right? Like he has this whole hallucination of Rogogen like coming in, right, and just sitting there silently.
Yeah. This other character who's just this kind of creepy guy coming into his room silently and just staring at him. But that when he talks to the maids and stuff afterward, like no one had been in and there's no way he could have gotten in.
Yeah, and the door was like latched or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so he describes that, and he also describes this dream that he had where there's like this horrible scorpion bug thing in his room, and it's like he's trying to get it, or he's terrified of it, and then it like creeps up on the wall behind him, and he jumps away, and then like his maids come in, and they're like scared, and then the big dog comes in, and the dog is terrified of it, and it's just like horribly creeping along the ground, and then the dog like bites it, and then it bites the dog's tongue, and there's like gross goo coming out, and the dog's like whimpering in pain and backing away and stuff. And he says that if his experience now includes things like that, and like the image of Rogojin just sitting there staring at them in this horrible countenance, like what's the point of living if that exists?
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of the transcendental state of the all the other
It really is
characters.
I think probably this perspective was brought in direct contrast to the prince's experience, which is it's right. It's so the opposite. It's like each instant is so precious and meaningful to the prince that it's worth it despite whatever it costs. And for Ippolyte, it's the opposite. It's not worth it no matter what, because of the cost.
Yeah. I wonder if any of it has to do with Ippolyte being younger, like 18, than the other
less experienced.
Yeah, and just kind of like doom and gloom, 18-year-old moody, reads Nietzsche,
edgy.
Yeah, edgelord.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think also, I mean, if it was a more like oppressive thing, like a sickness that wasn't giving you any like, seizures that have this moment of kind of ecstatic clarity, I mean, I could see how that would give you a little bit different mindset.
To me, it seemed like the core of why Ippolyte resents his existing in this state is because of the certainty that he knows he's going to die. Like, for example, he has about 6 weeks, he's been told, but let's say he didn't know for sure. If he had reason to believe he might be able to live for a little longer, maybe he would feel more like engaging with his life and like going outside and interacting with people and maybe doing good deeds, because he is not just sitting in his room staring at the wall in resentment. And maybe he'll have a chance, as he says that he wants to do good if he goes out and engages with the world. But then, because he knows that he's going to die in this time frame, he gets in the mindset of what's the point of going out when he has the sense that there's this particular time limit after which there's no hope.
Yeah, it kind of gets to the question, like, if you would you want to be told when you die if you could know?
Yeah.
Which I don't think I would.
Yeah, I think most people would say no.
Yeah.
This is something that's really interesting to me, that we have this theme across all of these, at least across the executions and Eupolide's experience, that the certainty is the worst thing. And this seems to be Dostoevsky's core argument against capital punishment. It's not worth it because the certainty is so above and beyond. And he does a really good job here, I think, explaining how that's the case. But for my own experience, of course not with death, but of grief in general, or bad things happening in my life, it's always the uncertainty that is the worst by far. And then when you finally know that the worst has happened, then it comes as a relief, and you can accept that. But it's the not knowing that just like completely tears me apart anyway.
Yeah, no, I definitely get what you're saying. I mean, yeah, I think part of it is that, yeah, like most of our lives are uncertain, and we have almost no things that are for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have something that is certain and it's, hugely negative, like death, it just kind of it's really hard for us to wrap our heads around. But I think, I mean, there's, when something is this absolute certainty, and then it happens, then it's over, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the case of death, like, it's not like that is the end.
Mm-hmm. So
it's going to happen, but you will always be approaching it until you're not there anymore.
Yeah.
I feel like that's that's the thing that gets you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I think that ties back into what you were saying before about, like, if you can accept that the world around you is also you, then even after you die, you, quote unquote, still exist because the rest of the universe still exists.
Yeah. Well, and also if my theory about time and consciousness is true, you're just gonna respawn at the beginning of your life anyway. Yeah, he does. He mentions that gigantic insect as representing some very almighty, dumb, irresistible power.
Like maybe that's his disease.
Yeah, he says before that, I beheld in some strange and impossible form that dark, dumb, irresistibly powerful, eternal force. Yeah, it could either be his disease or just kind of the inevitability of death or something. That's which in its own way is kind of transcendent and meaningful in the same way that the prince is talking about with the seizures and the execution, but it's like the flip side, dark version of that.
Yeah, it's whereas the prince is coming to terms with his death and accepting it, Eupolide is rejecting it, and he's gonna go kicking and screaming to the last instant.
Yeah.
One other thing that really stood out to me about Eupolide's confession tirade is he seems really upset and put off by the fact that people are unhappy. He has this sort of sense that how dare you be unhappy? You get to live. I'm going to have to die. How dare you suffer? How dare you not make the best of your experience and reject suffering and fight your way out of it?
Yeah, and I think that kind of gets back to what the prince was talking about with the Apanjan women in the beginning, about how the guy swore that if he wasn't executed, then he would live for the rest of his life in that state of just, soaking up every moment, and you just can't do that no matter how hard you try. I mean, like, maybe that's what people who have just done like thousands of hours of meditation, the place they get to, but I don't know, it's definitely not something that everyone or most people by far can actually sustain, I think.
And he goes on as well, and it's not just like, how dare you suffer, but also like, how dare you express unhappiness? Like, he talks about if just going out on the street and seeing a guy pass by in a carriage and the guy is scowling, and just being so horrified by that, like, why are you scowling? Why not exult? And yeah, maybe it's like not something you can sustain on average, but
yeah, I mean, people can kind of improve their outlook. Definitely.
And it seems like too, like he's making a moral judgment against people on the grounds of, yes, on one hand, their own personal outlook, but also how that expresses to the world around them. Like, if you're upset and you stay at home and don't have any interaction with anyone, then, well, that's one thing. But if you're outside and scowling and someone sees that, you have lent to the experience of suffering in the world, and you've sort of conveyed that upon the world in a certain way.
Yeah, and it's gonna have a ripple effect if you influence that other person.
Yeah, he talks about this as well. I think in the Brothers Karamazov, there's just a passing scene of, like, if you go about in your day and you've got a scowl on, or you're going around in a rage or something like that, and you may not think anything of it, but if there's a child there and they just happen to see you, the child will notice. And even if you don't notice the child, you've created that horrible visage within the mind of the child. And so like, yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, kids are pretty impressionable in anything. I mean, they're just soaking up all the information they see. So yeah, something like that might have a way bigger impact on them than it would on a normal person. And yeah, and you never know, like, if someone's already having or in a bad place, and you just add that last bit of unpleasantness that just, like, totally, makes their day just that much worse, or spins them into just a worse and worse mental state.
Because you think about, like, kids who are impressionable, and they'll see patterns of dysfunction and they will repeat it. They take in the world and then they mirror it and put it out there. Maybe you've known a parent who is prone to go around in rages, and then you see their little kid mirroring that and also going around in a rage. And in one sense, there's this, like, almost comical, because it's like, it's like a little puppet, but then on the other hand, it's kind of sickening.
Yeah, because the kid doesn't know any better.
So Eupolide goes on and says, why don't I just, now that I know I'm about to die, why don't I just go out and kill 10 people just for fun? Because, like, he's like, it doesn't matter, y'all suck. Why don't I just do it? Just because, like, just to see the look on their faces when they want to try to convict me or something.
Yikes!
Like, what are you gonna do?
Is that in this chapter?
It might be a little bit further on.
Yeah. I did read a little bit more the next chapter because it begins with I had a small pocket pistol.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
I didn't get super far though.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, no, I did read that part though. Yeah, what if I were now to commit some terrible crime, murder 10 fellow creatures, for instance, or anything that, yeah.
Like, what are you gonna do? Convict me to death?
Joke's on you, sucker.
Yeah.
On that note, any final thoughts?
Yeah, there's just one more quandary takeaway that this section gave to me, which is, if you have this certainty of death that's so horrible in these 5 minutes before you're executed, and if you accept, which I don't necessarily accept, that it's not worth that amount of suffering, and then you have the certainty that you're going to die in 6 weeks, and that it's not worth it to live in that period if you're not going to be able to contribute and continue to exist, then what about when you know, just in general, that at some point you're going to die? Like, that it is an inevitable thing that's going to happen in your future.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, that thought hasn't really ever gotten to me. I mean, like, I'm afraid of dying, but only afraid of that it'll be painful. You know?
Interesting.
I'm more like, the thing that really gets me is just like bad things happening other than that. I mean, I do feel like I definitely wouldn't want to live forever. So the idea of dying, it has to happen at some point. And I the fact that it happens might make life even more meaningful because it makes it sweeter. So I guess that's kind of along similar lines to the feeling that the people were having before they were executed, just on like a bigger scale. Because I think they're responding differently to like 6 weeks versus 5 minutes is maybe more just a result of the specific people rather than just the length of time.
Yeah, definitely. And so I don't know. For me, there's the takeaway that, like, yeah, you're gonna die at some point. It might be sooner, it might be later. That doesn't stop you from engaging with your life now and finding meaning in it as you're here. And eventually you won't be, so why not?
Yeah. That's pretty straight up existentialist thinking. Just, did you ever have to read The Stranger by Camus in high school?
No.
Yeah, similar idea. Actually, I think it's I think I'm remembering this right. I think it's someone else who's getting executed. And he basically comes to the conclusion that it's going to be someday, and what difference does it make whether it's in 2 days or in 2 years?
Is there does he come to any sort of conclusion there?
Yeah, I mean, that's the conclusion. It doesn't make a difference whether it's in 2 days or 2 years or 20 years. So he doesn't fear it anymore.
That's an interesting. Yeah, I mean, I see that perspective. I don't know. I mean, I definitely see the value in that perspective, but I don't know if that is something that I would hold to be true for myself.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't really get behind being indifferent to it being 2 weeks or 2 years or whatever, because I think as long as it's fairly good experience, the more is always better, even if it's neutral. But the other side of the existentialist thing is kind of life doesn't have any inherent meaning, and it's just whatever you give to it.
Yeah,
which I definitely do get behind.
Yeah, maybe if you're in a repressive system, like if you're in prison, or if you're in a messed up society where everyone's suffering, maybe there's more inclination to think that it's doesn't matter, that it's not worth it. But if you have the freedom, then maybe it is.
Yeah, well, if you take it as life is kind of neutral by default, then yeah, if you're in unpleasant circumstances, then it would seem kind of meaningless. But actually, I mean, now that I think about it, I think it's true that there's no inherent meaning. Like there's not. Yeah, I'm not actually sure what I believe because one, we're the small fraction of a percent of the universe that is experiencing consciousness. So that on its own is insanely meaningful. And then I feel like that there is kind of an objective, make the world a better place for the people you're with while you're here somehow in some form. Don't make it shittier. Of course, it's relative what better and shittier actually mean, but
yeah. Well, I mean, if you can make meaning, if you can find your own meaning in life, then it would follow that you can create more meaning if you have the freedom to do so, if you're in an environment that cultivates that.
Yeah, definitely.